I want to walk you through the Google hiring process. This is their hiring process in general, but we're going to be focusing on product managers. My name is Alex. I was a group PM at Google for 4 years, so I conducted hundreds of interviews inside Google. I've reviewed thousands of resumes. Now I work with product managers to help them land their next top tech role. And today I'm going to be going over Google's own stated hiring process, but I'm going to be providing some commentary, some behind the scenes, and some additional information where things that they talk about are not quite as clear. So let's get right into it. First, they're talking about the hiring process. They want to make it as clear as possible, and that is true. If you're ever unclear about what to do, you can just ask your recruiter. Most of them are pretty friendly. They're on your side. So just engage them and ask them for help along the way. Let's talk about the map. So self-reflection. They're saying, let's start out, what are you actually about? So this is mostly for product managers. So I would say this is not a bad little self-reflection exercise, but we're going to skip through this because I'm assuming that you're a product manager. So now you're job searching. All right. So you can learn about the company. You should learn about the three respects, the mission of the company, the vision of the company, the values of the company. This is all pretty useful stuff. Now, for the resume, this is where we get into some initial juicy stuff. They're saying start with a blank document. That's not a bad idea. A lot of resumes these days are pretty wacky. They include all kinds of weird formatting. They go on too long. And I think that's not a bad idea. And maybe we will link the template that we use in the show notes below in the description. Use a blank document, use very, very simple formatting, and look at some of the things that they say. Align your skills and experience with the job description. That is true. I would recommend finding the top 3 things that you think the hiring manager is looking for, and then customizing the top third of your first page of the resume for that job description. Not the whole thing, but just the top third, because that's really all the recruiters are going to be looking for. Don't forget to include data, which basically means impact. What did you actually do? You're a product manager, so what happened as a result of your work? Be specific about projects you've worked on or managed. What was the outcome? There it is again. How did you measure success? When in doubt, lean on the formula. So I have a little bit of a slightly different formula, but this one's really not bad. Accomplish this thing as measured by this other metric by doing these actions. So it's not a bad formula for a bullet. Don't let the bullets be too long, maybe 1 or 2 lines at the most. If you've had a leadership role, tell us about it. How big was the team? What was the scope of your work? This is integral to figure out the leveling. They need to understand if you've led, because this is the one big binary element that you're going from a, let's say, senior PM to a group PM or to a director role, or if we're not talking about PMs, they need to know how to figure out the leveling and people management and the size of your team, both cross-functional and direct ownership or direct reports, is the biggest determinant of your level. So they want to know if you were a people manager, put it up top somewhere so they understand what was the scope of the work, what was the size of the team. They need to know this. If you're a recent graduate, you have limited work experience, then include school-related projects, which means if you graduated 2-3 years ago or more, please don't include school-related stuff such as GPA or other silly things like that, because what matters more is what you did in the last 2-3 years of actual work. Keep it short, they say. We don't have a length requirements, but hint, hint, think twice before letting your resume move on to multiple pages. What does that mean? It means Google wants 1-page resume. 1 page, it just means you have to focus. Just tell them the main things that they need to know that gets you to match to the job description. In fact, I got into Google with only a 1-page resume, and many of the product managers that we work with inside the Product Career Accelerator also use 1-page resume because that's our recommended approach. And look, it's also Google's recommended approach. A word on cover letters. They are not required and may or may not be considered. Read between the lines. They're not going to be considered. So it's your call whether or not to include one. If you do include, we have the same suggestions for building a good resume. Just keep it short, have it relevant. So I would say no cover letters. We do recommend doing separate outreach where you're writing an email or a DM, maybe on LinkedIn, because you're trying to say, hey, I can solve this problem for you. But the format there is not a cover letter format. It's more of a practical format. Hey, I'm applying to this thing because I've done this other job at this big company with this much impact, and I can do the same thing here. Please forward this resume to your recruiting coordinator. Keep it super, super short. It's not really a cover letter. It's more of a what I can do for you, what problem I can solve for you. Apply online. It's tempting, but doesn't work well. Trust us. Quality, not quantity. We want you to focus on the jobs that delight you. So for our product managers, that usually means you can apply to 2 or 3 jobs, and then you can keep coming back. You can apply again in 2-3 weeks and again in 4 or 5 weeks. You can keep trying to apply as long as the jobs themselves make sense. And look, their logic is you can only apply for 3 jobs every 30 days, which makes sense. So I would say like a few weeks in between jobs, totally appropriate. Side note, most Googlers applied for other roles at Google before they eventually made it to interviews. That's so true. Don't self-select yourself to say, hey, they probably don't want me, or I've applied 10 times, they probably don't want an 11th. Don't say that. There's no difference between a top tech PM and a non-top tech PM. In fact, as I always say, the only difference between a Google PM and a startup PM is that the Google PM works at Google. So that's the difference. Listen to Google tell it to you straight. Most of them applied to other roles before they eventually made it. So if things don't work out, don't let it stop you from applying again. Interviews. If a recruiting team member believes you might be a match for a job you've applied for, you'll enter our hiring process. So what this means is if your resume makes it through, or if you requested a referral, which they don't ask you to do here, but I recommend to do, if you have a way into the company, a referral will get reviewed before the external resumes are submitted. There's usually a big bucket of external resumes, and the referral pile is almost always smaller and reviewed first by the recruiters. If they do reach out, they are probably going to say, hey, can we set up a quick conversation just for a chat? And during that conversation, this virtual chat, you're going to be chatting with a recruiter, and you need to run it as a discovery event. You need to run it as a discovery call. Don't treat these calls as a way to advertise yourself and market yourself as the best possible applicant. No, instead, use it as a discovery call. You find out about the problems that the recruiter has. You get information, and then you can tailor your pitch so you can actually solve for the problem that they have and make yourself a very interesting candidate. Assessment, they do send this assessment. Don't be frightened by this assessment. It is a multiple choice question and answer, an assessment that effectively they're trying to figure out, hey, are you going to be a good PM at Google? The instructions that I always give our PCA members is just act like the best product manager that you can, and you're always going to do fine on the assessment. We've never had anybody not get through the assessment. Sometimes there's project work, but for a product manager, most of the time, sometimes that does happen. Sometimes project work will happen. For PMs, it's not as often. Most of the time, though, it's a fairly standard interview process, which is product design, strategic insights, and leadership and Googliness, which is basically behavioral, and then a cross-functional interview. In the end, they say, we want above all to assess your skills, see if you and this role will be a match. There are no brain teasers anymore. They used to have them, but they don't have them anymore. And who knows, you might even have some fun. And this actually is something that I ask PCA members to optimize for. If you can go in there and have a great time at the interview, it vastly improves your chances of success. Because if you treat it like a fun puzzle, fun challenge to solve together with a future coworker, you're much more likely to perform better on the interview. Here are the guiding lights that they suggest. Structured interview. Every candidate is assessed using clear rubrics. That's true. We had 6 or 7 rubrics for each question that we asked. And at the end of each interview, the interviewer had to submit an answer. Hey, how did this candidate perform in this rubric? How did they perform in this rubric? What evidence do you have? It's very, very rigorous and structured. And we use those rubrics for all folks being considered for that role, so everyone's evaluated from the same perspective, allowing their distinctiveness to emerge. This is true. But the net result of this is that almost nobody got strong hire signals because we were using this structured rubric to assess a person. It was very rare that someone would just right off the bat demonstrate all the things that they need, even though a lot of this information is out there. This is why it's so important to not just know the stuff, but to practice, practice, practice. And when you practice, please don't just practice with your buddy or friend. You need to practice with calibrated coaches so that you can understand the gaps. We do ask open-ended questions to learn how you solve problems. We want to understand how your mind works, how you interact with a team, what your strengths are. What this means is there's often not a right answer. It's more of how do you think? We want to just share the structured thinking that happens and how you make decisions and how you have a logical flow to everything and how you do all that within a certain time limit. So this is truly important. People think, oh, I probably didn't say the right answer. That is not true. We never look for the right answer. All right, decision and offer. Yes, then after that, there is going to be a recruiter will come back with a verbal offer. I recommend you negotiate. Don't negotiate so hard that you lose the offer, but you should know that if you look at all of these compensation points, you're going to find that the median offers pay for all of the edge case offers. Since this channel is all about how to become $1 million product manager, this right here, this point of the offer, is one of the highest leverage points that you have in your entire career. So you really, really want to optimize and maximize these opportunities. That's about it. If you've already got a Google or other top tech company interview scheduled and you don't feel fully prepared, please don't waste these opportunities. If you do have that interview coming up, schedule a time to speak with our team about perhaps partnering up on this so that we can do it together. We can support you on the way. You can find a link in the description to schedule a call. If you have any questions about this hiring process or any other top tech hiring process, let me know in the comments and we'll make another video to follow this one up. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.